Hello everyone, in this tutorial I will be making an off-the-shoulder maxi dress. To create this look, I used a rayon print fabric. For links to fabric suggestions, please check out my blog. Alright, for this tutorial you're going to need your fabric. You'll need 3 yards of 1/2 inch elastic. You'll need some coordinating thread. You'll need a measuring tape. You're also going to need a ruler, preferably a yardstick. I got this at Lowe's for about 60 cents. You'll also need some pattern paper. This is freezer paper, and this is optional. If you don't want to make the pattern piece for the skirt, you can just go ahead and mark your fabric. So this is optional. You'll also need a Simplicity pattern 8124. You'll also need some marking utensils, one for your fabric and then one for the paper pattern we will make. You'll also need some scissors, so you'll need one for your fabric, one to cut out your pattern, and if you're making the pattern piece, we'll use it for that too. And then lastly, you'll need a seam gauge, or if you have some index cards, this works just as well. We will be needing this to make the casings for our dress. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. In order to determine which size was best for me, I went to the finished garment section on the back of the pattern and I looked at where it said C bust. And then I went over to a measurement that was about 10 inches or so larger than my bust, and that was 44.5 inches. So I ended up cutting out the small. Alright, for pattern pieces 6 and 7, what I did was I'm going to shorten mine 3 inches because I want my elastic waistband to, when I have my dress on, I want it to sit at my waist. So what I did was just right at the waistline, which is about 3 inches, I just went ahead and folded that up. Okay, go ahead and grab pattern piece number 6, and what we want to do is measure the length of the bottom. So I cut out the small, and mine measures out to 11 1/4 inch. So I'm going to write that down. And what you want to do is we need to double this measurement. So that's going to be 22.5 inches. So I'm going to take that 22.5 inches and I'm going to mark that at the top of my pattern paper. So if you're doing this directly on your fabric, then you can go ahead and draw 22.5 inches directly on your fabric. Alright, so now that we have our 22.5 inch mark measured out, you now want to measure down the length of your skirt. So for me, that was 43 inches, so I already have my paper cut out. But for you, go ahead and measure down how far you would want it to go. Make a mark. Okay, and from wherever you mark how long you would like for your bottom of your skirt to be, you're going to then, from this measurement, you're going to measure over 30 inches. And once you measure over 30 inches, make a mark. And I do 30 inches because when my fabric is on the fold, the maximum width for me is 30 inches. So now, from the end of this 22.5 inch mark that I made down to the 30 inch mark, I'm just going to sketch it together. Or you can use your ruler to help you close it up. And we will be cutting it out on the fold here. So I'm going to go ahead and right fold. Alright, let's go ahead and take our pattern pieces and cut out our fabric. Alright, now that you have everything cut out, we're going to attach our front and our back bodice piece. So starting with the back bodice piece, before we attach it, I'm going to make a little snip right here where the fabric is on the fold. And just a very little small snip. That way when we get ready to attach our skirt to our bodice piece, we'll have the center back marked. Alright, now we can lay the front and back bodice piece with the right sides together. And I also went ahead and finished off my raw edges with my serger, but you can also use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. So I'm going to go ahead and pin along the edges here. Alright, now we can take it to our machine, and using 5/8 of an inch, we're going to sew these side seams. Alright, I'm using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Lowering my needle, go ahead and start sewing, and then back stitch. Alright, and you can press this seam open. Alright, now take your sleeve pattern and fold it to have the right sides together. And we're going to pin and then sew along this edge. Alright, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, go ahead and lower your needle, start sewing, back stitch, press the seam open. Alright, so now we have our sleeve and we have our bodice piece. You want to take your sleeve and you want to turn it to the right side facing, and right where the seam is, you want to align this seam. Well, then you want to place it on the inside of the bodice. And what you're going to do is align this seam with the seam of the bodice. So I'm going to align those together and pin in place. Then next, you want to make sure that the sleeve that you have chosen, that there is one notch that lines up with the one notch in the bodice. And then on the other side, make sure there's 2 notches in the bodice, matches up with the 2 notches of the sleeve. Alright, now we are going to sew along where we just pinned. Alright, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, lower your needle. Go ahead and start sewing. I need to get my presser foot together. Back stitch. Now you need to finish off this seam allowance. So you can use your serger, you can use a zigzag stitch, or you can stitch again at a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then cut really close to that stitch. Or you can, those are the options. And then once you're done finishing off this seam allowance, go ahead and press the entire seam towards the sleeve. Alright, so now we're moving on to the skirt portion of our dress. So we need to finish off the raw edges at the top and bottom of our skirt. I'm going to use my serger, but you can use a zigzag stitch. Alright, now that our raw edges have been finished off at the top and bottom of our skirt, it's time to pin our skirt right sides together. So go ahead and take it and put it right sides together. And now we're going to pin along this edge and sew it closed. Alright, I'm using my serger to sew this closed, and I'm using 5/8 of an inch, but you can use your sewing machine and then go back and finish your raw edge with a zigzag stitch. But to save myself a little time, I'm just going to do it all in one using my serger. So if I was sewing right now, I'd back stitch. If I was using my sewing machine, I mean. Alright, once you're done sewing up the skirt, go ahead and press it towards one direction of the skirt. Doesn't matter either way. Alright, go ahead and take your bodice piece and turn it to the right side facing outwards. Now working with the top edge of your skirt, we're going to pin our bodice to our skirt. So go ahead and on your bodice, find that clipping that we made in the back bodice piece. Once you found that clipping that you made in the bodice piece, go ahead and align that with the seam in the back of the skirt. And we're going to actually put it right inside, tucking it right inside of our skirt. Now we have the right sides facing together, and we're going to take that notch that we made in our bodice and line it up with the seam of the skirt and place a pin right there. Now next you want to pin around the entire bodice, matching up the top of the skirt with the bottom of the bodice all the way around. Alright, using 7/8 of an inch seam allowance, we are making the casing. We are making the casing for our dress. So go ahead and lower your needle, begin sewing, back stitch, And let's just sew all the way around. Now it's time to trim the raw edge of our bodice. So I'm cutting it real close. So go ahead and trim it all the way around. And then once you're done trimming, you're going to take this seam and you're going to press it up towards the bodice. Alright, now that you have your seam allowance pressed going up towards the bodice piece, we need to now make the casing for our elastic. So I went ahead and put 2 pins. One is a starting point, one is a stopping point. And then this space left in between here will be used to insert our elastic. So at my stopping point, I'm going to line up the edge of this seam allowance with my presser foot. And make sure when you're doing this part that everything is nice and smoothed out so you don't get any bunching anywhere. So just go ahead and start sewing, back stitch, and then sew all the way around until you get to your stopping point pin. Alright, next you want to cut a piece of elastic. So go ahead and measure your waist around your belly button, and then whatever that measurement is, subtract 2 inches, and that's the amount of elastic that you need. Once you do that, take your safety pin and hook it to one end of the elastic. And that opening that we left, go ahead and insert the safety pin there. And then what you want to do is push the pin through this elastic casing. So you're pushing and then you pull. So push, then pull. And it can be kind of tricky when you're first starting off, but you're just pushing the fabric over the safety pin and then you pull it. Alright, once you get your elastic out through the other side, go ahead and take off your safety pin and go ahead and overlap your elastic, and you can pin it in place if you would like. And what we're going to do is do a zigzag stitch to hold this closed. Now make sure your elastic one piece isn't twisted or anything, because once we attach it, you'll have to get out that seam ripper if this elastic is twisted at all. So go ahead and overlap them, and once you do, place the overlap right under the presser foot and change your machine to a zigzag stitch. Go ahead and lower your needle and just start sewing, and then back stitch. And I'm sewing again, and then I'm back stitching, and I'm sewing and back stitching. So you're gonna just do it a few times and then you'll be done. Alright, so now it's time to sew this opening closed. So what I went ahead and did was I pinned my elastic out of my way so it won't get caught in my stitches. So what you want to do is find out right where you left off, and that's where you're going to place your needle. That'll be your starting point. Well, let me switch back to my straight stitch. And then just go ahead and sew and back stitch and close it up. And while I was doing that, I made sure that this edge was lined up with the presser foot. Okay, so I have my garment laid out, and I'm looking at the top edge of the bodice. So they have the sleeve here and the bodice piece here. Now before we make our elastic casing, we need to baste these seams where we sewed our bodice and our sleeve together. We need to baste this down. So what we're going to do is for all 4 seams, right here in the seam allowance, we're going to do a basting stitch about an inch in length. And that way when we insert our elastic, this seam allowance won't get in our way, because trust me, I've gotten irritated plenty of times trying to squeeze that safety pin and this thing is all up in my way. So we'll do this on all 4 of the seams, just running a basting stitch along here, and then once we're done, we'll use our seam ripper to take those basting stitches out once the elastic is inserted. So there's nothing else behind it, so you're only working on 1 seam at a time. Alright, make sure you change your stitch to the longest one on your machine. Alright, and I just tacked it down a little bit. Now when we get ready to insert our elastic, that won't be in our way. Okay, go ahead and do the same thing to the other 3 seams. Alright, if you have a seam gauge, then you can use that if you like. But if you'd like to use the index card, go ahead and take your index card, and we are going to draw a line that is 7/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to mark that. My last line was super crooked, so I'm gonna take my red Sharpie now. I don't know how I got it all off like that, but let me go ahead and fix that. Now I have 7/8 of an inch. I don't know what. My line before, it was all crooked. So make sure when you're looking at yours, you have your straight line, or it's gonna be all the way off. Shoulders would have been real crooked. Alright, now it's time to make the casing for the top part of our dress. So here is the top part. The top part of my dress is right here. And you can take your seam gauge or your index card. I'm going to use my index card because it goes faster for me. And using my 7/8 of an inch line, I'm going to take the top part of the bodice and I'm going to fold it over to that 7/8 of an inch line. Then I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to press it down. And we are going to do that all the way around the bodice piece. Alright, now that our casing is all made, we're going to go ahead and sew it. So I put 2 pins in mine. I marked a starting point, just like we did with the waist part. I put a starting point and a stopping point. So I'm going to start at my green pin, and I'm going to use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And make sure you turn your machine back. Make sure you're not still on that long basting stitch. Alright, I'm at my stopping point. I'm going to back stitch. Alright, after you're done creating your casing, go ahead and press it out. Alright, go ahead and grab pattern piece number 4, and we're going to use this as the guide to cut out our elastic that we're going to insert at the top of our dress. So go ahead and cut out the size. Cut out a piece of elastic according to the size that you cut out for your dress. We are inserting the elastic the same exact way that we did for the waist, pushing the safety pin through until we get to the other side. Once we're through to the other side, go ahead and overlap the elastic, start sewing and backstitch a few times to secure the elastic in place. Next, sew the opening closed, making sure the elastic is out of the way. Alright, now those basting stitches that we made to hold the seam allowance, we can go ahead and take those out. Alright, so this is the bottom of the sleeve, and we're going to do the casing the same exact way that we did for the shoulder. So all you do is fold it up to your 7/8 of an inch mark. You take your iron, you press all the way around. When that is done, you mark your starting and your stopping points, and you insert your elastic. Now for my elastic for my arm, what I did, they do have a piece in there, piece 5, for your armband, but I decided that because when I wear mine, I plan to roll it up a bit, and I don't want that elastic to get too tight around my arm. So what I did was I took my tape measure and I measured around about where I estimate where I want my sleeve to hit. And for me, that was 9 inches. So I went ahead and cut a piece of elastic that was 9.5 inches. I added a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. I just know from past experiences that elastic, sometimes it can feel like it's cutting off my circulation. So I'm like, let me be careful. But yeah, so just go ahead and test out a piece and maybe just try one, see how you like how it feels, and then make adjustments if you need to. Alright, so the last step is to hem the bottom of the dress. So this here is the bottom edge, and I'm going to use my index card, and I have a 1/2 inch mark already marked on mine. So what I'm going to do is fold it up to that 1/2 inch mark, and then I'm going to press my iron all the way around. And then once it's all pressed, I'm going to flip it over and do a top stitch to hem it. Alright, now it's time to top stitch. I have the edge of my fabric lined up with the edge of the presser foot. Alright everyone, this concludes the tutorial. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for future tutorials. And also check out my blog and other social media outlets for more pictures and other DIY projects. Comment below if you have any questions. And if you so happen to sew, stitch, and slay this look, be sure to tag me on IG at Montoya Mayo so I can see how you rocking it. Alright, until next time.